Good evening, everyone, and welcome to TED.com at UMW. And before we start, I'd like to ask you all to please silence your cell phones, just so that we don't disturb the speakers this evening. And our first speaker is Maddie Sarlo, who is a potential psychology student who wants to explain the unexplained. I've got a kind of uneasy feeling about this talk, but take it away, Maddie, with the fear frequency.
Hello. Is this on? Can you hear me? We're all good? All right, cool. In the winter of 1959, 9 young Russian hikers set out on an expedition through the Ural Mountains in western Russia. They were students of the nearby Ural Polytechnical Institute, all very experienced hikers and led by a skilled professional. They set out on January 27th, but on the night of February 2nd, every single one of them was killed. When rescuers found what remained of their campsite a few weeks later, on February 20th on Kolatsyakal Mountain, what they found baffled them. Here I've shown you some real photos that were taken from the scene. The tent was partially collapsed and covered in snow. Footprints surrounded the tent leading off in several directions, and upon further examination, it was revealed that the tent had been torn open from the inside, and all 9 hikers had rapidly fled the scene without even putting on their clothes. In fact, most of them took off completely barefoot, leaving their shoes and coats inside the tent despite sub-zero temperatures. The bodies were found in the nearby woods, a few hundred meters from the campsite, next to a makeshift campfire and a tree with several broken branches and smears of blood on it, suggesting someone had tried to climb it so frantically they'd badly torn up both hands. Later, autopsies revealed that, not surprisingly, most of the hikers had died of hypothermia, but as far as a few of the others, the results were a little bit stranger. A couple of the hikers had suffered massive internal injuries, such as crushed skulls and rib cages, with absolutely no external indication of injury, no bruises or scrapes from a fall, no blood, nothing to explain what could have caused those massive injuries. In fact, of much of the severe internal damage they'd suffered, medical examiners compared to what would happen to the body if you went so deep underwater that the enormous pressure crushed you like a soda can. The Dyatlov Pass incident, as it was later coined after Igor Dyatlov, the leader of the group, remains a mystery still today, half a century later. However, many theories have arisen to try to explain the events, most of which have been debunked. It wasn't an avalanche or an earthquake. It wasn't an attack from a wolf or a bear or the nearby native tribespeople. It wasn't a UFO, and it wasn't a government conspiracy, hopefully. But one theory still stands: infrasound. Infrasound is defined as the category of sound waves below 20 hertz, which is at a frequency or a pitch too low for the ear to hear. It can come from natural sources, such as earthquakes or tornadoes, or from man-made sources, such as generators or engines. And some animals, like elephants, actually use it to communicate over large distances, sometimes from miles apart. In fact, it's also most likely the reason that animals can sometimes sense natural disasters like a tsunami or a hurricane before they occur and get to high ground before we even know what's going on. They can actually hear the storm coming because they can hear the frequencies of sound that we can't. But just because you can't hear it doesn't mean it can't do things to you. Like any sound, infrasound creates vibrations in the body that normally would enable you to hear the sound, but since infrasound is too low for you to hear, the vibrations can actually resonate in different parts of the body other than the ear and create some spooky effects. It can cause nausea, dizziness, headaches, chills, shortness of breath, unexplained feelings of intense fear and dread, and in some cases, even full-blown panic attacks. In fact, researchers believe that infrasound could be to blame for many of the supposed paranormal events or hauntings or ghost sightings, because infrasound can be amplified inside of old buildings, giving them that creepy haunted house vibe, and the vibrations created by infrasound in your eyeball can actually cause you to see things, such as a blur out of the corner of your eye you might attribute to being a ghost. All of that, coupled with the intense fear infrasound can cause, and you've got the perfect recipe for a haunting. Russian scientist Vladimir Gavreau, pictured here with his alleged invention, the infrasonic whistle, is credited with the discovery of the physiological effects of infrasound when, back in the 50s, workers in his laboratory would consistently report experiencing nausea, chills, apprehension, and even seeing apparitions while working in the lab, leading many to believe it was haunted. However, one day, when it was discovered that they had a faulty ventilator fan in the laboratory, they removed the fan, and all of a sudden, the room felt different. All the reports of nausea and anxiety and chills stopped. It was like all of a sudden the lab was no longer haunted. So Gavreau, being the scientist that he was, decided to run some experiments and found that, indeed, the ventilator fan had been emitting infrasonic waves that were messing with the scientists' heads. Now, you might be wondering what all this has to do with the hikers on Kolatsiako. And the reason is this. One of the most plausible theories to try to explain the events that occurred there that night is what's known as an infrasound panic. This is a real satellite image of what's called a Kármán vortex street, up there on the left. That's a type of wind phenomenon that could have formed over the peak of the mountain that night, generating infrasound at a high enough level that all the hikers sensed it and panicked, even if they wouldn't have necessarily been hit by the wind itself. They fled the tent and most likely got lost in the dark trying to find their way back, hence the need for a makeshift campfire and hence the hypothermia. But there's still lots of debate over whether infrasound could have caused the mysterious injuries on some of the hikers. Many people say that's impossible. But lots of research studies have shown that infrasound can indeed be harmful in high doses. In one experiment that exposed rats to high levels of infrasound over the course of a couple of days, the rats ended up with damage to the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain responsible for memory, and that plays a great role in emotional processing. In addition, studies have shown that people who live closer to wind turbine farms, a known source of man-made infrasound, are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and insomnia than those who don't. And the risk increases the closer you live to the windmills. But could infrasound alone have caused injuries in the hikers akin to those of car accident victims? The military thinks it could have. Sonic weapons sound like something out of science fiction, but they're not so implausible, which is why the US military is currently investigating what they're calling acoustical warfare. Now, it's a well-known fact that a loud enough sound can make you go deaf, can damage your hearing. Sounds above 150 decibels are enough to rupture the eardrum. Just as a comparison, an average conversation takes place around 50 decibels, and an ambulance siren is around 100. A sound above 200 decibels would generate enough air pressure to kill you, even if that sound is at a frequency that's too low for you to technically hear. You would certainly feel it, which is why the military is experimenting with ways to create a targeted sonic, potentially infrasonic weapon. And that's also why we can safely say that even if naturally generated infrasound capable of killing 9 people might be extremely rare, almost, well, pretty much unheard of, we can say it's not impossible. And it very well may have been what killed those 9 hikers on the mountain that night. We may never know for sure what events exactly transpired that night. Lots of conspiracy theories say that the Russian government was testing some secret weapon, but unsurprisingly, the government has denied all involvement in that event, and since then, almost 60 years later, no secret Russian weapon has been exposed that would have caused that. In addition, not many other theories that are super plausible have arisen. So, we do know, though, that sound is powerful, extremely powerful. Research has shown this over and over and over. And maybe infrasound wasn't responsible for the deaths of those hikers, but it certainly is responsible for many other supposed hauntings and illnesses and yet more that we have yet to learn about. And as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once said, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Maddie, for that awesome talk. I want to believe. And next is Teresa Vera with Reaching That A.
Okay. Am I good? We can all hear me? Sweet. Okay. So, first question. Little test for you. Am I good? Okay. Who can read this? Raise your hands. Anybody? Any measure? Sweet. So if you can read this, you really should thank your music teacher, and not just for teaching you how to play music or play an instrument or how to sing. Music has already had an amazing impact on your academic and your social life, whether you realized it or not. Studies have shown that students who take music have higher math scores, higher science scores, higher SAT scores, and learn second languages faster. This is data from a 2012 SAT, and the blue is students who took more than 2 years of music, and the red is students who took less than 1 year. As you can see, there is a 41-point difference. I can totally read my slide. In the reading section, a 29-point difference in the mathematics section, and a 44-point difference in the writing section. So that's the easy to prove academics of it. The social aspect is a little bit harder to prove. There aren't any nice statistics or percentages to turn to, so I have to be the proof. So my freshman year of high school, I started out, as the kid who would sit in the back of the class and just watch. I wouldn't volunteer myself for presentations. I would just watch everyone else in the class. But as I started taking music 3 times a week, I noticed a change. Gradually over those 4 years, not necessarily all at once, but by senior year, they were pretty evident. In just how I post for pictures. Also I put myself out for leadership positions. I auditioned for my school's drum major. I helped a friend start a club. I even went on a date for the first time ever. So, yes. Yeah. Sorry, thinking. Yeah. So those are the social aspects of it, and that's just the self-confidence. Music also has an impact on teamwork. So when you're part of a band, you're not just playing the notes on the page. Like, you're not just playing A, D, G, whatever. You're listening to people around you, in front of you, behind you, and next to you, and making sure that you're fitting within their sound, that you're playing in the right tune, you're playing at the right tempo, you're playing at the right volume, so that you're actually making good music. And that's teamwork. It also teaches leadership. So when you're in a band class, this is all the sections of a band. And if a music director were to try to take those sections and go through each class and go through each section one by one and go over all the music, it would take way too long, and everyone would be bored out of their minds, because no one wants to listen to the tubas play their whole notes for 5 minutes straight. Sorry, tubas, not really. Yeah. So what they'll do instead is they'll turn to the first chair, who's typically the best player in that section, and tell them, hey, go through and run whatever you need to work on specific to your instrument. So if that's a flute section leader, they'll run the 16th note runs, where maybe the tubas have whole notes. The tubas will run their weird interval jumps, and percussion will run their weird dashing around the back to every single instrument that they play. Yeah. So I've got a question for you. If music has so many benefits, why is it being cut from schools? Well, imagine you're a member of a county school board and you're told you have to cut one of these 3 programs. The STEM program, your students need to get into college. The football team, which brings in revenue every Friday night. Or the band, which doesn't charge anything for their concerts. More than likely, you're going to end up cutting the band, because you're going to cut the thing that brings in the least amount of finances and is considered the least important. So what can we do about it? Well, that's where it gets a little difficult to prove the effects of music. If you want to prove that geometry is necessary, you tell students to take a standardized test and then compare it across the country and say, we need to improve because the students in Virginia aren't as good as the students in Alabama. Well, you can't do that with music. You can't say, here, play this test, and it wants you to play every note perfectly in tune, at exactly the right tempo, at exactly the right volume. Well, you can't standardize music. If this test says that you're out of tune. Depending on what key you're playing in, certain notes are supposed to be too sharp or too flat. That's what makes it sound good. If you're off tempo, well, jazz doesn't necessarily have a set tempo. Some ritardandos, where they slow down, sometimes you slow down more at the beginning of the measure versus the end, and it's just up to stylistic choices. Music sounds better when it's played by living, breathing human beings who don't play everything perfectly perfect. So it's up to the members of the community, to the adults, which includes all of you, though I don't know who thought giving us responsibility was a good idea. It's up to us to write to the school boards and tell them we want music to stay in schools, because everyone can benefit from music regardless of where you're from or where you're going, whether you want to be a biology major, whether you want to be a psychology major, whether you want to actually play music. Regardless, it has a huge impact. So I have one last suggestion for you. If you can read this, you really should thank your music teacher. Thank you.
And thank you, Teresa. That was truly music to my ears. And so typically classifying people isn't a good idea, but this next speaker is going to tell us why it actually might be.
In the 1950s, Ray Bradbury wrote a short collection, or a collection of short stories titled The Martian Chronicles, and one of those stories was titled The Martian. In The Martian, a husband and wife had just moved to a new town to restart their lives after their son Tom had died. One stormy night, a figure had appeared on their porch, and it turned out to actually be their son Tom. The mother was immediately convinced that it was him and let him in the house, but the father was kind of weary. And so the next day, the mother was doing chores with Tom, and the father had found out that Tom actually wasn't Tom, he was a Martian. And so while Tom was off doing chores somewhere else, the father had went up to his wife and asked her if she really believed that it was him. And she was so happy that she had got her son back that he couldn't bear to tell her that it wasn't actually their son. And so the mother wanted to take Tom into town, but he seemed to be very scared to be so close to people. But they did it anyways. And so when they went into town, Tom had run off and showed his true form, which was a Martian with an empathetic shape-shifting ability, which meant that he was going to form into whoever was at the top of people's minds. So a family had seen him, and he had shape-shifted into their missing daughter. And so meanwhile this was happening, he was running through town and people were chasing him because he was shape-shifting into all these people that they wanted to see. The father of Tom went to get the Martian back because his wife was so upset. And when they were escaping town, the Martian had spasmed and died because he was so exhausted from shape-shifting into so many different forms. And so the reason that I'm sharing this story is because I think that it is an analogy for us as people and how we can often get exhausted and lose ourselves when we try to focus on making other people happy and be who we're not. And we can become very scared to be different. So I wanted to learn how we could truly accept our differences and learn what our differences are and where we could start. And so what better way to get to know ourselves than taking a personality test? And so I chose MBTI because it is one of the most popular tests out there, which means like if you ask somebody else what their MBTI type, or if you ask somebody what their MBTI type is, you're more likely to get an answer than if you asked about a different personality test. And so the results of the test, you could have possibly 16 different personalities, and within each one there are 4 letters. And the first letter you could get an E or an I, the second letter you could get an N or an S, the third could be a T or an F, and the fourth could be a J or a P. So the first 2 letters, E and I, stand for extroverted and introverted, and those are how you prefer to, or where you prefer to get your energy from. So extroverts prefer to get their energy from outside of themselves, like other people, and introverts prefer to get their energy from within themselves. The next letter would be S or an N, and it's an N instead of an I because the I was taken for introverted. And so that's how you prefer your information to be received. So a sensor would prefer their information to be received in a more literal and sequential way, while an intuitive would prefer it in a more figurative and random way. The third letter could be a T or an F, and that stands for thinking or feeling, and that is how you would prefer to make your decisions. So if you're a thinker, you would prefer it to make your decisions in an objective and impersonal way. And if you're a feeler, you prefer to make them in a subjective, personal way. And then the last letter would be a J or a P, which stand for judging and perceiving. And that's if you prefer to be decisive and planned, you're judging, and if you prefer to be flexible and spontaneous, you're a perceiver. And so one of the main words that I used throughout describing each letter in this was the word prefer, because when you get your result, it's going to be on a scale of preferences. And so it's very rare for someone to be a pure type, which means it's very rare for you to be 100% of one letter. So it would be rare for you to be 100% introverted or 100% extroverted. And so that can lead into some common misconceptions with this typing. So oftentimes people think that if they have the same personality type as somebody else, that they're going to be the same exact person. Or sometimes they think that if their type is different than somebody else, that their type is better, or that they're not going to be able to work with that other person. And that's unrealistic, because you cannot possibly have a test that could describe each person in the world and only describe that one person ever. And so I have some examples of people who have the same personality type that I think is very safe to say are not the same person. So the first example is going to be Hitler and Gandhi. The second is Albert Einstein and Meryl Streep. And the third is Michael J. Fox and Madonna. And so basically why I think MBTI is important in understanding your differences is because it shows you what you prefer and it shows what other people prefer. And once you understand that those preferences are different, you can work around that. And MBTI is a good place to start, but it's definitely not a place that you should stop. And so once you understand your different preferences, you can begin to communicate more effectively with people and create better relationships with them. Because differences should be valued because they make us who we are. And my final remark is, don't be a Martian, be different. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for telling us why personality typing matters. And our next talk is by Chase Forrester, who is going to share his experience with a very popular TV show.
So hi, good evening. My name is Chase Forrester, and I have been tasked with enlightening you all of the few of the lessons that I learned from several people who resided in the metropolitan area over the course of a decade. Now, the people happen to be fictional, the city is in New York, and the events were conveniently televised on the NBC network under the title Friends. Now, there was volume, but I guess there's no volume. It's okay. One of the two reasons that I have for the show being so iconic is because, firstly, the characters are very relatable. Now, I'm sure most of you have stuffed your head inside of a raw turkey. No, I'm sure. So I'd like to say that the characters, their personalities are relatable, such that if you are organized and OCD, you might relate to Monica. Or if you are sarcastic and witty, then you relate to Chandler. And there's a character on the show that's for everybody. So you can find someone and enjoy the show. Secondly, the show is very iconic because of the wide range of backgrounds among the cast. For example, we have a white woman from northwestern Los Angeles, and contrasting her, we have a slightly taller white woman from northwestern Los Angeles. Now, this is actually one of the biggest critiques of the show, that being the lack of diversity among the cast, and I can't apologize for that because, well, I didn't make the show, but I can hope that had the show been made in 2017, then we would see a wider range of backgrounds in the characters. So after watching every episode and analyzing every pun and metaphor, it was revealed that the lessons ingrained throughout the show could be compressed into a 10-minute speech and delivered by a confident, charming college student. Unfortunately, he was unable to be with us today, so I will be giving the speech instead. So the three lessons I want to share with you today are embracing yourself, laughing at life, and appreciating the relationships in your life. So with embracing yourself and being unique, I know that everyone has like one thing about them that makes them unique, but I think it's a culmination of your personality and experiences that is what really makes you you. Now, I'm sure everyone in here has been asked, like, what's one thing that makes you unique? And again, that one thing might not be really unique to you because I'm sure other people can share it. So that's why I like threes. Threes are a good number. So has everyone in here played Last Man Standing? Maybe. Okay, so everyone in here is going to raise your hands because I don't want to stand. Nobody else wants to stand. So you're going to raise your hand. I'm going to share with you 3 qualities that I find to be unique with me. And if you share that quality, you can keep your hand up. And if you don't, you have to put it down and you're out of the game. There's no dinner. I'm sorry, you lose. Okay, so the first quality, I have been to Disney World. Okay, it's about almost half. Second, I have flown over an ocean. Okay, we got maybe a quarter left. And lastly, I can do a standing back tuck. Oh, one person? Okay, see, that divides. Once you're out, you're out. You can't come back in. Okay. So just to show that 3 qualities really helps to make you unique. Now I know while those 3 may be true, I have 3 more that I think are more to who I am. So everyone raise your hands one more time. So the first one, I was adopted from Bulgaria. Yep, that's usually the kicker. Secondly, I lived in New Mexico for 10 years. Has anybody else perhaps done that? Nobody? Okay. And lastly, I can do a standing back tuck. Because I find that to be a unique quality that it's hard to find in other people. So to continue on that thing of being unique, I think Phoebe, who is the girl up there with the guitar, is the character that most shows that lesson because she does whatever she wants, whenever she wants, because she doesn't care how people look at her. So I want to show you a short clip, and with the theme of the holidays, she'll be singing her holiday song. Oh wait, there's no sound. Oh no. That's okay. I guess we'll have to skip that. Just imagine really funny things happening right now. Perfect. Thank you.
Haven't heard it yet, so go try to sing along. No, don't sing along. Monica, Monica, have a happy Hanukkah. Saw Santa Claus, he said hello to Ross. And please tell Joey, Christmas will be snowing. Rachel and Chandler, Happy holidays, everybody.
So I could not talk about the show and not show a clip. So there you go. Now we can all know what we're all talking about. So for the second lesson, laughing about life, I think this is very important because if you're not laughing about life, then you are, as my 4th grade teacher put, or life will be, as my 4th grade teacher put it, a long suck fest until you die. Yes, my 4th grade teacher put that on the board. I'm not sure what she was feeling. So thank you for that, Mrs. Schubert. So for some of you, this may be difficult to laugh at your life because you're all perfect specimens, I'm sure. So to help you begin the process, I will share a story with you about my life that you are free to laugh at. So for a little background, on that top row is my 7-year-old dog, Golden Retriever, named Frisbee. And on the bottom row is our new puppy, Maggie. She's about 8 months, I think. Oh, you think so now? Just wait. Anyways, so one day back in my teen years, way long time ago, about 6 months ago, I went out with some friends really late, 9 o'clock, and I left the door unlocked. Okay, let's all remember that. And I go out, I have some fun, I come back around 1 a.m. I think I'm in a little bit of trouble, but I asked my parents, and since I'm like the perfect child, they said yes, I could go out. So it was a little iffy there. But I walk up to the front door, and I'm thinking it's unlocked, and I go for it, and it's locked. I'm like, oh crap, what do I do now? And so I'm like, maybe it's an old door, you know, it gets stuck. So I went and reached for the handle again. And it just made this really bad locking sound. And then the dogs heard it. And they started barking. And I was like, oh, crap, now I'm really in trouble. I woke everybody up at 1 a.m. What am I going to do? So I ran around the side of the house. I was like, how am I going to get in? And I remember we have a dog door. So I was going to go through the dog door and go in the house and be fine. And so I hopped the fence. And to my surprise, I land in a nice pile of number 2 left by the golden up there. I was like, oh, crap, quite literally. But I can't track this mess in the house, and it'll smell. And so I take my shoe off once I crawl through the dog door, and I leave that outside, you know, to rust. I haven't touched it since. And I walk into the laundry room, and doggy number 2 on the bottom there left me a nice puddle of number 1 for me to slip in. So that was a very fun night, just a lot of falling. And so the next morning, I'm like, hey, why'd you guys lock the door? And they're like, well, we didn't know you were out. And I was like, but I asked you. And they're like, oh, we didn't think you were serious. And I was like, okay, thanks. We're going to have to talk about it. So they still don't know that I went out for 4 hours. They don't believe me. And I was like, I did. I have a social life. It's fine. So lastly, I want to share the importance of valuing relationships, because you have the opportunity to influence someone else's life. And today, I think that's very understated. Now, in the show, friendships come in many different forms, whether that is with sibling bonds or classmates or roommates or spouses. I won't say which are spouses, because that would ruin the show. But it's just the nature of those friendships that is really what makes them very special. And people today are forgetting that it's not just you in this world. There's 6 billion people, 7 billion people in this world, and you need to have support to survive. And without that, you will just be alone, and you'll probably end up like my 4th grade teacher who said that life is a long suckfest. So life doesn't have to be a suckfest, is what I'm saying. So the one thing I want you to remember from this talk is to look at the people in your life and to know that while you support them, just make sure that they will be there for you. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chase. Could there have been a more hilarious talk? We'll have to see. And our next speaker is an aspiring teacher who is going to tell us about learning styles in the classroom. Give it up for Mia Burgess.
Okay, hi, good morning, good evening, I don't know. So, have you ever just sat and looked at someone and thought, why are you doing what you're doing, and why is it affecting me? This happened to me a lot in high school because, as Christina said, I want to be a teacher. So I would look at what my teachers are doing, and I would be like, okay, I understand, this helps me with this, whatever. But a lot of my teachers would make me take one of these at the beginning of the year, and I don't know why. It's based around your learning styles. You know, it's supposed to tell you how you learn best. Okay, so first day of school, my teacher is putting me in a box. Okay, and you know, thinking about it, they don't use it because they're not going to look and say, okay, so 20% of my kids, they're visual learners, and like 80% are like auditory learners. I'm just going to ignore the visual learners and do all auditory stuff. That's not how it works. And you know, even if it was how it works, you can't just like repeat the information the same way, same way over and over again in like the same style. You got to change it up. You got to incorporate different things, so that way your class doesn't look like this and more like this. So, senior year of high school, I got to take this class, and this was my favorite class, Teachers for Tomorrow. I had been wanting to take it forever. First month, you spend learning about teaching. Semester, forgive me. Second semester, you go into schools. That was the fun part. But anyway, I had to get through first semester, and during that time, we talked about learning styles, and I had to take one of those surveys again. And we discussed what's the best way to incorporate learning styles in the classroom. Should we, you know, go off of their student preferences? Well, no, we already said why that's bad. So should we just throw them all in there? Well, We don't want to do something that's a waste of time. And sometimes you can't really put some of the learning styles into some of your classes, you know? Anyway, second semester, I did go into Blue Ridge, right? Middle school, great. 7th grade, history and English. That was really fun. I taught and created a lesson on the New Deal and fascism. That one was hard because headlines like this were really starting to become popular, and they had ideas. They were all wrong ideas, but they had ideas. And then in English class, that was my favorite. We translated Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing into modern English, and they acted out the scenes, a couple scenes from the play. And so, you know, looking back, I can see, okay, visual, auditory, interpersonal, those all go in history. Kinesthetic, interpersonal, those all go in English. Because in history, I'm just standing up there giving a lecture, having them take notes. English, they're running around outside the back of the school, like someone's pretending to be Benedict as he learns about Beatrice's love for him. Claudio falls to his knees. That was really fun. And so what I gathered from this was that learning styles correlate to what subject's being taught. You don't believe me? I'm giving a TED Talk right now. And so this really works great for visual and auditory learners because I've got visuals and I'm talking to you, so that's really great. But if I wanted to teach you how to make a cake, well, I could, you know, put up a slide and, you know, tell you how to do it. Best way to do it, though, is to have you make a cake. And this, I wish I could make this. I don't know how to make this, but it's so good. It looks so good. So that was really great. I know kind of what I'm doing now. Kind of. I still don't know what to do with these. You know, it's a waste of time, in my opinion. Like, teachers, they're always like, oh, we can't waste time. We've got a lot of stuff to learn, you know? And I thought that very recently, until I got here. Mary Wash, good old Mary Wash. And I realized I don't know how to study. I was one of those students in high school who could get by without studying. I showed up to class, I paid attention, took notes, did the homework, whatever. Get here, I had a hard time. And it turns out knowing my learning preferences really helped me in developing study techniques. I need to see videos. I'm an auditory learner. So by watching videos, I learn best through those. And you know, sometimes it's hard to find videos. So sometimes I'll just say it out loud to myself. It works for me, you know? And so maybe next time you have to take one of those surveys, hopefully you won't ever have to again, you can think about how you can incorporate them into your learning styles. Or, you know, next time you're sitting in class and your professor's like, all right, we're gonna do this, you can try to see why they're having you do it. And maybe you'll realize in a place you never expected to realize why they're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia, for talking and teaching us this evening. And our next speech is by Sky Horn, and it is called Ludonarrative Intersection of Interaction. Let's give it up for Sky.
Hi, so I'm Sky. Just a quick poll here. Who likes stories? Okay, good, all of you. Yeah, I love stories. I love books. I love TV shows. I love movies. I love everything. And, you know, I also love video games. And so I want to talk to you about what video games can do in terms of storytelling. And so that starts with ludonarrative. And ludonarrative is pretty much Latin for play story, essentially, is the gist. And it's pretty much a perfect example of how people take restrictions in their own mediums and really use that to enhance the stories. And so it started to think about video games really being able to tell any sort of stories when they used to look like this. If you can't tell, that's Steven Spielberg's E.T. Big hit, caused the entire video game market to crash. Or at best, they looked like this. Which is, you know, those are supposed to be land octopuses. That's the official name of them. I don't know that. But when something, you know, when you have a medium that you couldn't fit a modern song onto a video game cartridge back then, so how do you have a story and how do you show that? Well, they decided to do it through gameplay. And a very popular game, Super Mario Brothers, you know, there is a plot. You're a plumber, you're saving a princess by jumping on turtles and occasionally a spiky turtle. But so, they had to convey that somehow, and, they didn't really have a way to do that, but I think they did a pretty good job in their opening sequence. Yeah, so they didn't. But what they did do is they pretty much were like, you're this guy, you run to the right. They made it so that you actually, if you see, you can't go to the left. And so that was an intentional restriction to sort of show, hey, you have a purpose, go to the right, the story is that way. And your story is you get to a castle, and then you find out the princess is somewhere else, and then for God knows why, you do it over and over again for 8 times. And so eventually games, they got more developed. We got 3D, and it looks a little polygonal now, but eventually we got to this, where we've decided to put eyes on everything, including a hat. And, but now that it's sort of like that, we really want to play at more like deep stories. And what it leads to is games like The Last of Us by Naughty Dog. This is what the game looks like now. It's a far cry from the 8-bit Mario. But, it pushes storytelling in an interesting way, where the idea is you're this guy, to simplify the plot. It's essentially zombie-infested world. You're taking this girl across the country because she supposedly has the cure to, this apocalypse. And it doesn't just tell you that you have this relationship like a book does. Like Joel and Ellie, that you feel that they care for each other through the gameplay, through her helping you in situations. It's not something where you feel like she's burdensome. You really want her to be happy in life. And so when you find out that solving, the whole apocalypse would mean her dying, you take things into your own hands, and you may not do what's right, and you save her rather than save the world. But what a lot of players don't realize is at this moment, you're doing this without really thinking about it. It just comes naturally to you because you care about this character. But there are other ways to make a player feel like they're in this game, or like they're a character. In a spy series, Metal Gear Solid, they want you to feel like a super stealth guy. So how do they do that? They make it so that you can see where an enemy sees, and they restrict what people do. So yeah, so in real life, that would not really go well at all. But to make you feel like you're this super stealthy guy, they make it so that you can see where they see, and nothing else will affect them, even if you're standing right behind them. And so, games really give you this chance to make you feel like that. If they want you to feel adventurous, they give you this massive world that you can go and explore however you want to, or if you just want to go back into the cave and curl up and cry, you can do that, and the story will never go on. And, but every time you play the game, it's going to be different. It's not like you're not going to open a book and Harry is suddenly going to, side up with Voldemort. It's going to always be a consistent way. But, I'm not going to say that games are a perfect medium. I think all mediums have inherent restrictions. Nothing takes you out of a game more than, playing a game and then all of a sudden, your eyes with a mouth floating with a wig. So, yeah, and this plays into ludonarrative. It is called ludonarrative dissonance. And while some developers can, play around with this, it's still such a new medium that they're still running into unintentional things like this happening. But so, what this really has, taught me is that every medium is it's different, and it's evolving, and, there's always a new way to do things. And I think video games are a really good example of how you can push things forward while, keeping a semi-consistent story. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sky. And to push forward with our talks this evening, we have Connor Underwood with Senses Aligned, Making Music with Synesthesia. Connor.
So how many of you think that you have a unique way of looking at the world? Nice. So how many of you actively use that to enhance your work? Yeah. So what I do that with my synesthesia. Synesthesia, oh sorry, the synesthesia is a condition in where your senses are mixed. And that can be, like my friend, when she sees color, she tastes things. Or when you touch things, you might hear musical notes, or when you see other people's pain, you might feel that pain on your own body. There's two main types of synesthesia. One is association, where you just sort of associate the sense with another sense, and projection is the other type where it's like a physical thing in the world. And the best way to illustrate that is with this. Grapheme color synesthesia is the most common form of synesthesia, and that's where you associate color with letters. And so association, you would see something like this in black and white, but if somebody were to ask you, you'd be able to tell them exactly what color that is. It's sort of a subconscious thing. Whereas projection, you see the color on the letters themselves. So my synesthesia, I see sound. When I hear sound, I see shapes in the air. So synesthesia can be a lot like this, but for me, it's something a little bit more like this. This GIF I was lucky to find online. And so, but what does it mean to see sound? Well, for me, I see it physically, but it's also a sort of sight beyond sight. The best way I can illustrate this for you is to have you hold out your hand in front of you and for you to close your eyes. And then I want you to move your hand around your head and move your fingers in different configurations. The way that you know exactly what your hand is doing and where it is in space, almost as if you can see it, is kind of like mine, which kind of explains why people might be a little bit confused when I say I can see sound behind me. So when I see sound in front of me like that, I can also physically see it behind me in the same way where if you move your hand behind your head, you know exactly what is going on there. So for me to illustrate what synesthesia is like for me, I need to take you back to my childhood. When I was younger, I was really into superheroes. And so one of the superheroes I made was a girl who had the exact same kind of synesthesia that I do, but the projections of the sound that she had physically manifested themselves in the air, so she had a form of telekinesis. And so she would have special gloves and like special hearing aids where when she moved her arms around in different configurations, they would play different sounds for her that would correspond with a shape that she could manipulate space with. And so if she was in a situation where someone was falling off a building, she could hold out her arm and the sound shape would appear before her. And in case you're wondering what this sound, like this shape would sound like, it's something more like that would be playing in her ear as that's happening. But as you can probably tell, I'm not much of a visual artist. And so, but I've always been really into music ever since I was really little, probably from the 2nd grade on. And so I decided to take my synesthesia and use it more to enhance my music and expand my experience with music further. One of the projects I was working on recently, I wanted to have a wine glass sound effect, but my computer didn't have the sample. But the way I experience sound, I think that sound can be added, it can be multiplied, it can be subtracted, it can be divided. And so if you don't have something that matches all the specific textures, you can take two separate sounds and put them together to get something close. What I mean by textures is the way that the sound interacts with the space in the music, not just how I see it, but how it interacts with the ambiance and how it also interacts with the other instruments in the piece. And so I was working, like I said, I was working on something that needed wine glass or a glass harmonica kind of sound effect, but I didn't have it on my computer. So I thought about the shape, which is this one down, I just pushed the wrong button. There we go. This shape down here at the bottom. And I noticed that if you took the flute sound right here, and you took a piano sound like this, and you layered it together, you'd get the glass harmonica sound effect, or something at least similar enough to it, where you could write music and it would sound close enough to and mix with the instruments enough for you to be able to get by. And so I have some samples for you to listen to. It's the flute, piano. That was a little bit too quiet for people to hear. Can I try that again? Okay, close enough. Glass harmonica. And so I wanted to demonstrate, I want to give you an example of what glass harmonica sounds like live in concert. And I also picked a holiday song for the holiday spirit. Here you go. I'm not sure if they had to mute that on the live stream because of copyright reasons, so if you're sound cut out and if you're watching it at home, I hope you didn't panic. And so I also arranged this piece, the segment of the piece, so that you could hear what it sounds like with my method. You can notice the flute and the piano laid out on the screen. Do you think we could raise the volume a little bit in the room, please, for the next song? It's not exact, but it's close enough where you could work with it. And here's the piece that I was working with that I needed the sound effect. I just took the part with the glass harmonica sound effect. And that's my own original work. Oh, it's loud. That's my own original work. And I noticed that the technique works a little bit better with faster pieces that have more jumps in it, like this one does. And so this piece was done by my awesome peer mentor, Christina Montemarano. I asked her to contribute a piece so that I could demonstrate how I use visual art to inspire my music. And so this piece is called Firebird, and I'd like to start with the feathers at the top of the wing. I also, not only do I experience sound as shapes in the air, but I also experience musical notes as colors and musical keys as colors, but that's an association. And so I experience it more when I'm analyzing music or when I'm thinking about music. And so these ovular top feathers, that makes me think of piano. If you notice in the earlier illustration, piano is very ovular for me, and it's the most ovular of the contemporary instruments that I work with. And so I tried to center the chords around these colors. The maroon color would correspond with A flat. The browns and the woody colors would be F, and the golden colors would be E natural. And so those are the kinds of the notes I tried to center the chords around. The tail makes things a little bit more complicated because the tail colors correspond more with G major and E major. And so what I did was I put the whole piece in E major because in E major, A flat and the other notes from the top also exist, just in a different form, the most basic sense of explaining it. And the ribbony shape of the tail, that reminded me of strings, and so I wrote the string section based off of the tail. Finally, I took the neck, and that's what I used inspiration for the flute melody. I liked how it started out bright and kind of swooped up, and then it swooped down into a darker color, and that's where I got the inspiration for the melody. So when I do work using visual art, I don't write everything that I see, because if I wrote everything that I saw in this piece with all the individual shapes in there, it'd be a cacophony. It'd be a total mess. And so what I do is I take the most basic shapes, the smallest shapes, and I try to gain inspiration from that, and I just build from there. And I had to reflect the overall feel of the piece, like how I had to change the key to reflect all the colors that were happening down here, even though the colors up here were suggesting something else. And so I have a small snippet of what the final product of this piece is. It's too long for me to play here, but I'd like to for you guys to listen. So I'm done talking about me. If there's one thing I want you guys to take away from this talk after showing you my experience and my process, it's that everyone has something unique about them that they bring to the world and how they receive information from the world. They see the world in a unique way. And so I started out having this really small thing about me that I didn't really understand, and I tried to expand on it and grow with it and use it to grow my craft, and that's how I got here today. So when you guys walk out of here, I'd encourage you all to think about what innate thing you have that influences how you see the world that others may not have, and for you to apply that to other things in your life and to hopefully expand on it enough where you can contribute something to the world and make something entirely new. Thank you.
And thank you, Connor, for bringing Firebird to life. I can't believe it. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm Christina Montemurano, and that was my piece. So our next speaker is Kate, and she is going to talk about gifted education. Give it up for Kate.
Hello. Sorry. Okay, so when I was in elementary school, I got our miniature whiteboard out of my attic, brought it into my room, and tried to teach my younger siblings how to do multiplication. When I was in middle school, I begged my mom to pay $100 to let me go to Latin Con, even though none of my friends were going, because I thought learning about Latin for 2 days sounded really fun. There's Toga Kate. In high school, my senior year, I flew to Chicago at 5 in the morning and then drove 5 hours to La Crosse, Wisconsin to participate in an international problem-solving competition. The point I'm trying to make is I've always been an academically focused person. Academics, learning, school have always been where I feel comfortable and where I have fun and what I really like. I love learning. That's always been something about me. And I've always been an academically advanced student too. So in second grade, I was so far ahead in math that my teacher wanted me to do math with the third graders. And so instead, I spent the whole year out in the hallway by myself doing math projects because I already knew what the class was learning and they were learning it way slower than I needed. In third grade, I joined a gifted education program, and it was the best thing to ever happen to my education because I suddenly found myself actually being engaged in class, and suddenly I felt like I was surrounded by people who were learning the same way I was. And it wasn't that I was doing more work than my peers at a different school. It was that I was being taught stuff in a different way at a pace that was good for me and in a way that really engaged me. So I'm not just here to brag about myself, even though I like doing that. I am here to talk about hell, high school. This is Maggie L. Walker Governor School for Government and International Studies, National Historic High School in Richmond, Virginia. If you couldn't tell by the pretentious title, it's a high school for gifted students, and it's where I spent the past 4 years of my life. And Maggie Walker did a lot of good things for me. It's a great school. It offered so many opportunities that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else, and I'll always be thankful for that. But the biggest thing that it did for me is it killed my love of learning. Because when I was at Maggie Walker, I was so overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work, the sheer amount of stress, all the pressure, getting into college, getting an A in this class, getting my GPA to a 4.9, that I wasn't focusing on, whoa, this thing I'm learning is really cool, or hey, it's really cool that I get to do this. Because by the time I was in even my sophomore year, I was exhausted, worn out, I was drowning in work. And my entire life was centered around what I was doing for school. I wasn't doing anything other than going home, sitting in my room, and working and studying all night long. And even though, as I've said, I'm an academic person, I still have friends, and I like to, have fun, spend time with my family, watch movies. And when I no longer had time for any of that, when everything was about school and pressure and stress, I began to hate it. And this experience is not unique to me. I've talked to everyone, not everyone, but dozens of people who go to that school who feel the same way. From the time they get there, they feel like they're drowning in work and they become miserable, even though clearly they were high-achieving, academically focused students who took a test to come here. And so Maggie Walker has recently tried to limit homework and do other things to try and fix this problem, but it hasn't really done anything because the real problem isn't in exactly how much homework we give, it's in how we think about gifted education. Because we've drawn these false equivalences that more work equals more challenge equals better education, and thus better education is achieved through giving people more work. And this is flawed on all accounts because it makes assumptions that really aren't true. The only way to get more challenge isn't through more work. It's through the quality of work, it's through the type of work, it's through how critically you're being asked to think and what types of things you're being asked to do. And better education isn't achieved necessarily just through more challenge. It's achieved through asking people to do things, so looking at stuff in different ways and giving assignments that require more critical thinking and more skills like leadership and looking at stuff in different ways, and it's about engaging students. Studies that have surveyed gifted students have found that what they've said when people have been surveyed is that the thing that made classes good for them, the thing that really made them like a class, wasn't the level of rigor, but was how interesting and how engaging it was, how interesting the topic was, the methods the teacher used. And the same studies have found gifted kids in talking about their education say they don't want all of their classes to be super challenging, that they don't want to be in a high-stress environment all day long. What they need is variety or balance, and that's true both inside of school and outside of school. And so, but instead we're creating this constant pressure where everything is super hardcore, which leads to problems. Burnout, which is categorized as an emotional state of exhaustion, usually caused by chronic stress, is one problem that's common among gifted students. And basically people are suffering internally and having all this exhaustion and disenchantment and just feeling completely wiped out, but they're still like going through the motions and performing well because that's what they've been taught to do. And also we've drawn another false equivalence that feeling the stress, feeling this pressure, not feeling like you're able to keep up with crazy amounts of pressure is somehow makes you stupid or not good enough. That part of being gifted, part of being academically advanced is never struggling. And studies have also shown that even though gifted kids tend to be overrepresented in people who suffer from anxiety and school-related stress, that they're underrepresented in counselors, and lots of counselors don't know how to deal with gifted kids because lots of time they're still performing well while breaking down. So they're not acknowledged as having problems, which makes things worse. And again, and then they don't talk about their problems because we have this whole thing where, if you have problems, you're not smart enough. And that's something that I think a lot of kids, think about internally because we all put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but also that's kind of reinforced by the way schools deal with these problems. So what we need to do to deal with this is to reframe how we think about gifted education and how we think about these struggles that gifted students have. We need to realize that there's not a line between more work and better education, and that gifted education is not necessarily all about challenge, but about variety and about interesting topics and going at a different pace and engaging, and realize that gifted children do not have the ability to do superhuman amounts of work, but are simply people who learn in a different way, who learn at a different pace than their peers, and who need to be engaged in the classroom in a different way. And also that they are people who struggle a lot, and that dealing with this pressure isn't a bad thing. Having stress, having anxiety, feeling exhausted isn't a sign that you're not gifted or you're not smart. And when we really critically examine these concepts and start to reframe how we think about these things, that's when we can create a better education system for the future. Thank you very much.
I promise I'm doing my job. Since we've been nourishing your minds quite a bit for the past little while, now it's time to nourish your bodies. So we're going to take a break and get some food so that we get the next round of speeches after. If you have any questions for the speakers, feel free to ask. If you have any questions for me, I got you. So let's take a quick break. experience the break. Unfortunately, I can't send you food, but I can, I prepared something that will demonstrate how the break went for all of us here. Good evening. Anyway, so the next talk is, okay, no. Is there? Okay, hold on a second. Okay, is there a way to? Yeah, spoilers. Don't know. No. Okay, so the next talk will be given by Ruth Wilmot, and it is a very touching talk. Are we going to switch the order now? No, we're not. Yeah, technical reset. I'm so sorry. You have to listen to me. Yeah, okay, I'll stop. Yeah, please don't look at the screen. This is spoilers for they're spoilers for future talks. Oh my goodness. Oh, we're back. Okay. So the next talk is by Ruth Wilmot. Start over. Start all over. Okay. Welcome back. So our next talk is by Ruth Wilmot, and it is called Masks and Vulnerability, Lessons I Learned as a High School Student. Give it up for Ruth.
And my name is Ruth, as Christina just introduced myself. And so when I was in high school, I felt like I was known as the student who had a bit of it all together. I was the straight A student, the student who volunteered for different organizations, and I've known what I wanted to do with my life since I was in 7th grade. So a lot of people often saw me just as that. People said I was organized, that I was well put together. But in some of my high school years, that definitely wasn't the truth. Indeed, for many years, I felt like I was wearing a mask, kind of like these Greek theater masks you see on stage. And I was always fascinated by Greek theater because the audience wouldn't see the actor's face. They would have masks with joy or anger or sorrow or whatever emotion they wanted to express. And before they went on, they'd put on the mask, and you couldn't see what the actor was feeling underneath. So a lot of people thought during high school that I was doing okay. But I wasn't always. Because during high school, 2 of my maternal grandparents passed away. My grandmother started developing serious Alzheimer's, and my closest sibling was diagnosed with autism. So I felt like I wore a mask and didn't show what I was actually feeling because I didn't want people to know, hey, Ruth isn't actually put together. Newsflash for them, I guess. And so the hardest question during these years was this: how are you? Maybe I'm a strange human being, but when people ask me how I'm doing, I have a lot of different thoughts in my head. How well do I know this person? How would they respond if I told them the truth? Should I tell them the truth? No, that's scary. Maybe it's easier to just smile and say, I'm doing fine. And so that's a lot of what I did. I smiled and say, yeah, I'm doing okay. And when I was originally thinking about this TED Talk, masks and vulnerability in relationships weren't anywhere in my mind. Instead, it was going to be about this man, Henrik Schliemann. Henrik Schliemann was a 19th century archaeologist and a bit of an idol of mine. I wanted to be just like him because he discovered the ancient site of the city of Troy. He discovered amazing things like this golden mask and this jewelry. But when I delved into Schliemann's life, I learned that despite his amazing accomplishments and all the wonderful things he discovered, he really had a hard time. When he was a child, his father actually physically abused his mother. He was sent away from his family to live with an uncle, and when he grew up, things didn't exactly get better. He had to tolerate 2 unhappy marriages, one to his first wife, Katerina, who absolutely despised him, and then to the second woman, Sophie, and their marriage, although more tolerable, wasn't necessarily more happy. It sounds a little bit like a bit of a bad joke. What do a 19th century archaeologist and a high school student have in common? Not much, right? So you would think. But what I found out was that Schliemann too had been wearing a mask, because in all his letters to personal friends and in all the books he wrote, he never really talks about his childhood or any of the things he went through in his adult life. But when I was wearing a mask in high school, I realized that there are consequences. Because even though people didn't see how I was really feeling, even though they didn't see I didn't have it all together, it created a lot of distance. I felt like sometimes I was looking out and I could see other people, but I knew they weren't seeing me and who I truly was. Because when you wear a mask, you're deciding to put up a wall between you and the other person, and it can't be crossed because you're just saying, I'm not going to share who I really am. I'm just going to put up this wall and show you what I want to show you, which in my case was that everything was going fine and that I had my life put together. And that was very interesting. And I soon felt, though I had a lot of friends and a lot of people to help me, like I was really alone in what I was dealing with. But then I decided one day to challenge myself. And I thought, I'm going to answer people who are close to me. When they ask me how I'm doing, I'm going to answer as honestly as I possibly can. And this was really difficult, because some days I would say something and I thought, why did I just say that, Ruth? That's like personal sharing. I'm not used to that. I'm used to putting up a wall and saying, like, I'm just going to say, like, fine, I'm doing great. Because sometimes when people ask me how I was doing, I'd have to be honest and say, you know, winter break's coming. I'm seeing my grandmother, and she hasn't recognized me in nearly 3 years. And that's really hard, and I'm not looking forward to it. Some days I'd be like, I'm great. I've had so many amazing things happen. But sometimes I had to be real and say, you know what, actually, I'm not doing okay. But the great thing about being vulnerable and showing who you are is you can receive empathy. And there's a lot of different definitions of empathy, so I'd like to show a short clip by Brené Brown, who I think defines it way better than anyone else I've ever heard.
And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone.
So when you're vulnerable and show who you really are, it's a bit like you're giving a gift, because you're sharing a part of yourself in a way that's certainly counterintuitive to the way most of us live. Because most of us put up masks in our daily life and decide to present ourselves in a certain way. But when you give the gift of vulnerability, the great thing is that you can receive empathy in return. And empathy and vulnerability create connections between other people. Because when you wear a mask, you're only showing the surface level, you can't go beneath it, and you can't form real connections. But when you share vulnerability, it's a great way to bring people together, because sometimes when I was vulnerable and I shared, you know, my sister has autism, I feel like a lot of people don't understand this. Some people were like, you know, actually, I have a sibling with disabilities too, but I never felt like I could talk about it. And so empathy creates these connections because we have all these things in common with each other, all these struggles that we don't even know about, because people don't always talk about it. So when we're open and vulnerable and share, it can be a great way of connecting people in ways you couldn't even imagine. But vulnerability is hard, and I don't want to lie when I say this, because sometimes you put yourself out there and you will receive rejection, and that's pretty difficult. I talk about my sister with autism a lot now, but when she was first diagnosed, I didn't really like to talk about it because people I felt didn't always understand. Disabilities are a little confused. People thought it was like a negative thing. And so when I reached senior year, I thought, I need to give this speech for something. I want to talk about this. This is important to me. This issue is important to me. I think more people need to hear about it. But my audience wasn't really focused on that. They were more focused like how I spoke, I made some factual errors, and all of those things are important, but I felt like they missed the message in that I put myself out there and I only felt like I got rejected. So when you're vulnerable, it's such an important gift that you need to be careful who you share it with and make sure you're not emotionally dumping. We've all had those people we know who share way too much and we're like, distance, please, I don't know you that well, this is really awkward, and that doesn't create any sort of special connection. Brené Brown put it best when I think she said, vulnerability means connecting with people who can share the weight of your story and people who you have relationships with. So yes, vulnerability is difficult. Yes, you will get rejected, and yes, it's so scary that sometimes even now I'm tempted to go back to wearing a mask and pretending like everything's fine. But when you find people that you can be vulnerable with and share it with them, it will connect you in ways that you can't even imagine right now. So if you think of nothing else, I would challenge you. If, like me, you feel like you struggle with wearing a mask, try and be vulnerable and share with the people who are closest to you, because you will be surprised by how much it can change and how much better your relationships can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, for encouraging us to share with others. The next speech is entitled Weird Like Me with Alexander Krenz. Give it up.
Hi. Who's heard of Percy Jackson? Excellent. Percy Jackson is important to a lot of kids, but especially kids with ADHD and dyslexia, the same disorders that most of the characters have. Kids like me and my brother. This is Annabeth Chase, my favorite character. Any Annabeth fans? I liked her because I could connect to this person. A witty, somewhat sassy girl who could plan things wonderfully, but still struggled with ADHD. Not a depiction you see a lot. When Rick Riordan originally wrote these stories, they were bedtime stories for his son, Haley, who has both ADHD and dyslexia. Haley said, "You read a lot of books, and none of them have a hero who is dyslexic or has ADHD. It's always perfect people in a perfect world doing perfect things." Percy is, in fact, very flawed, and he has to fight against that, and at the same time, fight monsters. For those of you who don't know the series, actual literal monsters, cyclopses and stuff. Percy Jackson is a wonderful representation of people with mental illness in media, but not all of it is quite as good. We are improving. We have significantly more than we used to. This dot represents how much representation we had. This is what we currently have. And however, this is where we should be. One of the issues with the representation we currently have is they tend to fall into two tropes. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the crazy murderer trope. An issue for obvious reasons. It's demonizing people with mental illness, and it would be okay if we had a few of these, but it is incredibly pervasive. One study in the UK found that half of all mentally ill characters in television are violent, and a quarter of them are murderers. In reality, surprise, the mentally ill aren't going to actually kill you. In fact, they're more likely to be victims of crime than the average citizen. The other trope, not as a little more difficult to see the problems with, is the savant. If you're not familiar with the term savant, it's on the idea of the person who has islands of genius. One or a few select skills that they are incredibly good at with absolutely nothing else. For example, Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. Amazing physicist, incapable of interacting with other humans. Forrest Gump from Forrest Gump. Amazing at ping pong and running. And that's it. And BBC's Sherlock. Wonderful detective, terrible jerk. This sets up a wonky set of expectations for those with mental illness and is a way of othering them. These people of course, aren't like everyday people. They've gotten this bit of genius at a cost. And it's also a way of looking down on them. Another reoccurring theme that's troubling is treatment is terrible. Of course, definitely, you wouldn't want a cast for your broken arm. Why would you want help with mental illness? Treatment is often demonized in media. The treatment is displayed as ineffective or detrimental to the patient, and those who are giving it are displayed as incompetent or wacky themselves. Two examples of this are Beautiful Mind and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Of course, in reality, treatment is useful. However, the stigma attached to it prevents people from taking their meds, from reaching out to family and friends, and from even trying to get treatment at all. Key aspects in recovery and living a happy, healthy life with a mental illness, which is entirely capable. We are improving, though. We've got some wonderful three-dimensional characters in media right now who do have mental illness. For example, Evan Hansen from Dear Evan Hansen, who has social anxiety, but is still more than that. Spencer Reed from Criminal Minds, who is a lovely detective, but also so much more. And Nadine, who has depression from Edge of 17. But that is just a note in her story, not the entirety of it. We need good mental representation of the mentally ill. We're getting there, and I know one day we'll be there.
Thank you, Alex. And this next talk is by Melody Seferar, and the only comment she had to make about her talk was this Grey Poupon, this Evian, this TED Talk. And her talk is entitled Screamworks, Horror and the Spread of Mass Media. Melody.
Thank you. Oh, am I audible.com? Okay. Okay. The story of Okiku is a Japanese ghost story about a maid who is falsely accused of breaking an expensive plate. And because of this, a samurai murders her and throws her body into a well. Thereafter, she rises up as a spirit with long, dark hair and pale skin and counts to 9 before breaking into sobs. Eventually, this makes the samurai go insane. The Ring is a 2002 supernatural horror film by DreamWorks Productions about a little girl with psychic powers who is killed for this by her mother, and her body is thrown into a well. Thereafter, she rises as a spirit with long dark hair and pale skin, and she haunts the viewers of a video about her death. After 7 days, she kills the viewers. Seem familiar? While one may seem like a story rooted in Japanese culture and the other may seem like just another American horror movie, there's more to it than that, and you have to look into the history of the latter. The Ring, the 2002 movie, was actually based off of a 1998 movie, a Japanese movie called The Ring or Ringu. And that in turn was based off of a novel by Koji Suzuki called The Ring. So you may be asking yourself, all right, so it's based off of Japanese horror, but horror is horror, right? You know, there can't be that big of a difference between the cultures. Not so. So in American culture, horror has been a huge integral part of our culture for centuries, ever since the creation of the country, really. So we had stories like The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and The Raven, to films like Frankenstein or The Exorcist or the Saw movies. So every generation, you know, you had this movie, this defining movie or defining movies that, you know, scared you so much you couldn't fall asleep that night, or maybe you had to keep the hall light on because, you know, maybe something's out there. Kids and adults alike, I don't judge. So recently you've seen this trend in American horror movies in the last 10 or so years of these spirits in these movies who are childlike in nature and have long dark hair, pale skin, and they are haunting the protagonists of these movies. And this is not just a one-time phenomenon. It is in movies like The Ring, The Grudge, it's in One Missed Call, it's in Dark Water. And you see this all the time, and it's not a coincidence. It is something that, as we will explore, is integral to Japanese horror in and of itself. So Japanese horror is so different to American horror that the newness in and of itself is frightening to us. For example, while still scary, American horror is mostly set in sort of dry locations. So you have cemeteries, you have basements. Also in American movies, or American horror movies, you typically see this theme of gore or violence. So you're typically going to see some amount of blood and guts, and probably you're going to see a fight scene somewhere in there. And then lastly, and what is a key difference, is that you're going to see this element of pure resolution. So at the end of the movie, you're going to have a lot of your questions answered. The unknown aspect of it is going to be gone. And unless they're setting up for a sequel, the evil is going to be dispelled or destroyed at the end. This is not really the case for Japanese horror. So Japanese horror is mostly set in damp environments. So the author of the novel The Ring, Koji Suzuki, says that damp environments are more conducive to the presence of ghostly spirits, so like a shower or a well. Another thing is that Japanese horror doesn't really rely on visceral horror as much as American horror. It's more about the ambiance. It's about creepiness, the suggestion of danger that may or may not be there. It's not necessarily a physical scare or a physical, you know, representation of horror, but an emotion that it evokes in you. And lastly, and most importantly, you have this element of the lack of resolution at the end. While there is a resolution at the end of the movie, it's not really answering all of your questions. And there is this sense that the unknown aspect is still there. The evil isn't really destroyed and is, in fact, even implied to still be out there in your world. So that gives the viewer less control over the thing that they're watching and their environment afterwards. To put it simply, American movies are about descending into the unknown, while Japanese horror movies are about the unknown invading the known world. So to understand this, we have to go into Japanese culture. So in Japanese culture, we have this mix of religions, this religious ambiguity, and how they perceive what happens after death. So Japanese people practice mainly two religions, a mix of the two, Buddhism and Shinto. So Buddhism, their perception of what happens after death is this cycle of life and death, life and death, life and death. And so life is just a deception, and in order to break this cycle, you have to convince yourself of this deception. Shinto, however, doesn't really say much on what happens after death, but there is this idea of reikon, or a spirit who is overcome with so much excess emotion or is not given a proper funeral and thus has to return to the physical realm. And this is so different from Judeo-Christian American sensibilities. So in that idea of what happens after death,
You have good deeds and you have bad deeds, and then after you die, you are sorted according to the amount of good deeds that you've done and the bad deeds that you've done. But this isn't really as big of a concept in Japanese culture after death. So in Japanese culture, you have these spirits who can do these amazingly good things, but they can also do terrible things. So they're really morally gray. They aren't easily sorted into boxes. And so with this concept of onin, or excess emotion, you have these spirits that appear in Japanese folklore, like in the story I told you, the story of Okiku, called yurei. So they might look a little familiar. They have pale skin, long dark hair, and they're actually wearing white funeral clothes. And as for the trend where they are frequently female, well, this is because females are thought to hold a grudge longer, and so into the afterlife, right? So take that up with the ancient Japanese, I don't know. And this is really different than what American audiences are used to. So now, we have to ask ourselves, does this idea of Japanese horror does it pervade any other forms of media? We've talked about movies, can we talk about other forms of media? Well, that's a complicated question because we don't exactly consume the same types of media they do. So you gotta ask yourself, when was the last time you read an American graphic novel or comic book? Right? So the answer might be more positive for this group because we are mainly young people, sort of nerdy, and that is sort of the core demographic of comic books and graphic novels. So this may be a skewed sample. But in Japan, it's not like that. So comic books, graphic novels are enjoyed by all audiences in the form of manga. And they are enjoyed by all ages, all demographics, all genders. You can see people reading it on a bus, it's something that you do. And so they really have us beat in terms of markets of graphic novels. So when it comes to the horror genre, there aren't really many authors that we can compare to in America. So there are some exceptions, like Robert Kirkman, he does the Walking Dead series. But then again, that is a concept that's been explored in other mediums, and it's not really original to the graphic novel. So one important mangaka, who is a graphic novelist, that's the word for one who writes manga, is Junji Ito, seen here with his cat. And he has really mastered the idea of descending into the uncanny valley, which is in drawing something that almost is human, but not quite. And so it gets across this creepy feeling that you can't help but feel uneasy about. So he's really mastered the craft of setting expectation against delivery and effectively frightening the reader days, weeks, months, and years after they read his comics. And he really has no rival here in the US. And that's why he's growing in popularity not only in Japan, but also in the US, where on Amazon.com, he's #2 for all global world horror graphic novel series with his compendium, his anthology of horror graphic novels, Uzumaki. So what does this have to do with you? You sitting right here or at home. So this is an important question because the genre of horror had generally been decreasing in popularity at the end of the 1990s. So you see, at the end of the 1990s, there is a drop in the number of horror films that were being produced because generally the genre had become stale. They weren't scaring people as often, and they weren't, it seemed that a lot of the ideas had been done. But then we have this revitalization by just looking outward from our own bubble of American kind of horror and looking outward into the globe. So this is an idea that I think can be applied to any circumstance. You know, you go into your workplace and you have no idea how to approach a problem. You have no idea how to get started on something because it feels like everything's been done and nothing works for you. Or if you're in a learning environment where
everything feels stale and you can't imagine doing something different. Or as a studio artist, trying to get outside of that realm that you know. Maybe all you had to do is change your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. And hey, if you like to talk, you should put the ring on it. And so now, Jilly Stone is going to tell us why your dogs are Clark Kent. Give it up for Jilly.
Hello. 155 million people in the U.S. own a pet. Now, nearly 79% of them have dogs. And that is a crazy high statistic, considering all the work that puts into having a dog. It takes time, money, and energy. You have to feed them and walk them and even bathe them, which can be a really big struggle. I know, because I am the designated dog washer in my family. But honestly, I think that this statistic is due to what I like to call the hidden superpowers. And it's not that dogs can fly, although it would be really cool to have a TED Talk on that. They can't, I'm sorry. But it's the little things that people can often overlook that make a really big impact in our lives. Now, dogs can increase fitness activity, mood, social support, health, and well-being, while decreasing cortisol levels, chance of heart attack, blood pressure, stress, anxiety, and doctor's visits. Now, I know that's a lot, but how, right? Like, how can they do all this stuff? So this is actually a picture that I took like a few weeks ago over Thanksgiving break of my dogs while I was walking them on the beach. The white one is Brennan and the brown one is Bourbon. But while I was walking them, I was getting exercise. And dogs have been proven to increase exercise in people by 30%, which is really good considering all the health benefits that exercise have on people, like increasing heart functioning and lower lipid levels and overall well-being. So this study was done by Karen Allen on stress, and dogs have been proven to lower stress. In this study, people were put in rooms with dogs, without dogs, or with a person. And these people were given stressors, like doing mental math, or maybe a TED Talk, but not really. And they were, like, their blood pressure was being monitored, and dogs were actually able to act as a buffer to increase blood pressure spikes, which is really important to lowering stress. Sorry. And when I was looking back, I was just kind of like seeing how this really affected me. One time last year, I was doing my engineering homework, and I was like really stressed out about this one problem that I couldn't get. It was a really hard concept, and Bourbon like came in my room and just laid down on my homework. I couldn't do it. She just sat there and wouldn't move. But this really took me to take a break and kind of calm down. And later I was able to actually do the task. But also having her there was also really beneficial. And that's another thing that dogs are really good at, is the companionship and the social interactions. Social interactions are imperative for people because we are social creatures. And increased social interactions actually improve cardiovascular, endocrine, and immune functioning, which basically means overall improvement of our body functioning. Now, dogs have been proven to help in situations that can be really hard on people, like maybe moving for children or even a divorce, dogs act as a constant and are very helpful for those kids. Or dogs have also been proven to help parents who are maybe recent empty nesters, and they often get a dog to kind of fill a void. So this is another way that dogs are really helpful, is in the elderly. And Judith Seigel did a study on this 1 year before receiving a dog in elderly and 1 year after. And the major difference between the 1 year was drastic decrease in doctor's visits. This is in part due to the improved health and the improved well-being. Another crazy fact that I found when doing this research was done by Froma Walsh. And dogs, after a person has a heart attack, the 1 year survival rate of people increases by 8.9 times having a dog as opposed to not having a dog. Dogs are not just beneficial in people. Dogs have been proven to help lots of different species. Zoos actually have started to pair dogs with a cheetah because cheetahs are extremely high stress, high anxiety animals, and it's become a problem. They are not mating or interacting with other cheetahs, and their population is decreasing. And what the zoos have actually done is, at a very young age, they pair a dog with a cheetah, and they grow up together. And these dogs really help to bring down their stress and anxiety levels. And it has improved the interactions between other cheetahs and really overall helped in the cheetah world for zoos. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave with a quote done by Caroline Knapp. Fall in love with a dog, and in many ways, you enter a new orbit. A universe that features not just new colors, but new rituals, new rules, and new way of experiencing attachment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jilly. And the next talk will be by Brian Harnish, entitled The Modern Bully. Brian.
Oh. Okay. Hi. Sorry about that bang. I'm a klutzy person, and that wall is not, in fact, a wall. So, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about the modern bully. It's not the classic face-to-face, physical, give them a swirly in the toilet kind of bully. It's more online, and it uses these subcategories to, well, bully them. So I'm going to focus on the most common types right now, which are trickery, flaming, and harassment. Oh, and cyberstalking. So as I was growing up, I was a semi-competitive gamer. Like, it was a hobby for me. And as I was in school, this is how cyberbullying was presented to me. It was usually a girl staring at a Word document saying, "I can ruin your life, no one likes you, loser." Or it was something like this, where Bad Girl 2 is saying, "I hate you," with a little angry face. And I was thinking, wow, this isn't cyberbullying at all. Like, I've been part of this community, and I've seen what it's like. So as I was growing up, I played a lot of Call of Duty and League of Legends, all of these competitive games where you can talk with a lot of people online. And you would run into these kind of people where they would accuse you of having brain cancer. And not that that's a bad thing that you can control, but they would just accuse you of it. And they would just be flaming you online because they have this kind of mask and they can't see the person they're talking to. So when you normally wouldn't say this to people like face to face, it makes it a lot easier to say things like this online. Another example right here where excuse all the swearing on this. I tried to censor it, but it didn't really work. People would just spam for you to like, well, commit suicide or do all these things for just doing bad in a video game, which isn't really that big of a deal. And yeah, you get these occasional good people where they say, oh, hey, good game. But then even people would just be like, speaking French. So, yeah. So that would be flaming. Just general toxicity within the video game world. And it's pretty uncontrollable because of the First Amendment. Because, freedom of speech and everything. So we're going to move on to the next thing, which would be harassment, where you're on social media and people continuously insult you and, well, harass you. And sometimes you're ganged up on. Obviously, this is a little bit extreme, but this is what some people have to deal with. That would be like someone who's named Ryan Halligan. This case was a few years ago. He was a special education student who got bullied from the 5th to 7th grade. And eventually in the 7th grade, him and the bully got in a fight that ended in friendship. Well, alleged. The bully got him to share a personal story with him, and he spread it online and then started spreading more rumors that he was a homosexual. Again, nothing wrong with that, but middle schoolers kind of think it's something to bully people about for some reason. So, he moved on, and then he started talking to this popular girl who was very pretty, and he shared another personal story with her where she spread it on the internet through text message, Instagram, and Facebook. And a week later after that, Ryan was found in his bathroom dead. He hung himself. So his parents were heartbroken. They started this campaign, and ultimately there were no laws introduced to stop cyberbullying. And then later, Amanda Todd, a well-known cyberbullying case, posted a YouTube video with index cards sharing her story. She started Skyping a stranger in middle school and showed him nude pictures of herself, which he saved and then posted on social media. He put it as his profile picture on Facebook, and he spread it throughout Instagram. She was called many, many names that would imply being slutty, and she had to move 2 schools, but she couldn't escape because, well, the internet is everywhere, and you can't really just move away like you could before the internet because, well, the bully's everywhere. So, later, there were no laws introduced after that as well because, well, they just kind of said that bullying is handled within the school and it would be way too hard for senators to introduce anything like that. So what I'm saying is we should have harsher laws against cyberbullying because, well, maybe not the video game kind where you're just insulting people for no reason because that would be way too hard to enforce, but maybe cases like these that end in suicide. It could be assisted manslaughter or assisted suicide, manslaughter, or even first-degree murder if you want to go that far. So, sorry, one sec. So, I challenge you that when you are on the internet and if you see anyone being just generally rude, that you should try to stop them. And if you can't, just hit the little report button and maybe something will happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian, for calling our attention to that important issue. And for the last talk this evening, it's going to get a little bit risque, maybe. So here is Emily Voorhis with 50 Shades of Moral Gray in video games.
Hey, guys. Hello. Can you hear me? Is that awesome? Hi. Let's talk about video games. Awesome. So, who's ever played a video game? Raise your hand. That's a lot of you. Great. Now, raise your hand again if you've ever been emotionally affected by a video game. That's a lot of you also. For those of you who've raised your hand, I am one of you. I love video games, and I knew I wanted to do my TED Talk on them, but I didn't know what specifically about. So I looked back at the video games that I've played so far, and I found something in common. A lot of my favorites all involved complicated moral decisions and gray morality. I really like that kind of stuff, and the thing that first awakened me to it in video games was this game, Telltale's The Walking Dead. So I found it when I was 14 or so, and this game, I was addicted immediately. It just has you constantly making decisions, whether what to pick in your dialogue or who lives or dies. I'm going to propose a decision to you. Don't answer it out loud. It's just sort of a what would you do scenario. Okay, so it's the zombie apocalypse, right? And you're alone. Well, you're not. You're all on your own. You have a few survivors with you, and you're in this small enclosed space from which there is no escape. There's this man, and he's keeled over on the floor. He's had a heart attack. He's had a history of heart problems. You knew this. Your survivor buddies. And now you have a choice. This guy is like 6 foot something. He's really heavy, and he could be turning into a zombie right this very moment. You have a decision to make. Are you going to kill him to save all of your friends and family with you as survivors? Or he might not be a zombie yet. He might not even be dead. Could you kill an innocent man? Believe it or not, I'm sure you can. This scene is a scene from The Walking Dead. As a 14-year-old, this was like the peak of moral questions ever. It totally changed how I saw video games, because I never thought video games could shake me to my core and make me question what ideals I had. But that's just one game. Let's talk about all games. Morality is a new thing to be included in video games. Obviously, in the earliest stages of gaming, we didn't have the technology for it. And even now, it's still pretty new. It's not super big. There's only a few groups, few companies and such experimenting with it. But since it's so new, there's a lot of different ways that it's being experimented with, and I would like to share some of those ways. This is a screenshot from the game Infamous Second Son, and it's indicative of how a lot of games handle morality. It's a binary choice. The whole game pauses, and you get to make this binary choice. One's good, one's evil. I'm pretty sure you can tell which one's which, like right off the bat. And you take the choice, and depending on what side you end up on, you're gonna be in the bad ending or the good ending. You typically play as good or evil in these games. It's a fair way to do it, but there's other ways too. Witcher, the whole Witcher series, but I'm pointing specifically to Witcher 3, is always been known for handling morality well. In this game, you play as a supernaturally enhanced protagonist, and you have to hunt down witches. But there's a lot of morality that actually comes with it. It's not binary, good or evil, and it's not prompted. A lot of the times, you don't even know you're making a moral choice until that choice backfires on you. Here's a specific example. One of the quests, you have to find a potion for this sick lady. It seems like an obvious good choice, but you don't know that how the potion affects humans. So it could just like do more harm than good. And you have to decide as the player if you're going to do that. It's very good, Witcher, at interweaving gameplay and morality. Not everything you do is a moral decision, but when it is, it's part of the game instead of pausing the game and letting you make the choice. Another game, Undertale. In this game, like in Witcher, you don't always have to play as good or evil, but it is more satisfying if you stick to all good or all bad. In this game, you play as a child, and you're trapped in the underground, and you encounter all these monsters, and you have to choose whether you're going to fight them or whether you're going to spare them. If you fight them, you get XP, you level up, you get all these different coins and material for you to use. It becomes an easier game. If you don't, If you spare them, you get none of that. For the most part, it's a harder game. But what you get out of it isn't material. You're not killing the characters, so you actually get to bond with them. It's a better story when you take the harder path, and it becomes, what you get out of it is what the player values. It's very satisfying, and it's a complete fusion of gameplay and morality. You're playing the game, but everything you're doing is making a moral choice. I'm not arguing that any of the ways that I've said are better or worse than another. They're all different versions of doing the same thing, and I really like all the different versions that we've seen so far. I think there needs to be more of every kind of morality. So, I've talked a little bit about how morality has been incorporated in video games. But why? Why do I want morality in video games? It's obviously interesting. I personally like complicated, morally gray stories, but it's more than that. Video games are interactive, and watching a TED Talk is pretty cool. Thanks for coming out. But you can't control what I'm doing or what I'm saying. When you're reading a book, you didn't write the story. You can't shape your experience of it. But a video game, you can choose to do anything you want within the limits of the game. You can choose to blow off that side quest, or you can choose to not kill that one guy because he has his hands up. But anyway, it affects how you experience the story in it, and it affects how you experience moral choice. Like, if your favorite character died in your favorite TV show, you'd probably be sad. It would suck. But in a video game, if you're the one who has to kill the character yourself, then it affects how you perceive that decision. And it makes characters feel things. Like they feel like they were just in the story. As we saw at the beginning, when everyone raised their hands, people feel emotions based off video games. They feel like they were a part of that journey. They feel like they were the ones who just went out there and saved the world. So imagine if we took that emotion and we let it loose, released it, and harnessed it to tackle greater, more complicated issues. I think that as the only form of interactive media out there, video games don't just have to be fun. Being fun is great. I love fun games, but it's the only form of interactive media out there. And we could use it to comment on the human condition, on really complicated things like love and connection and loss. And because of this, I feel like video games are the perfect medium to ask the tough moral questions of ourselves and of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. So, in case you were wondering, like, okay, who's this random person who's been talking quite a lot tonight? My name is Christina Montemurano, and I am the peer mentor for this class. I decided to become a peer mentor after a request from my previous instructor when I was a freshman, which was last year, so long ago. Dr. Mary Kaler, and she, being a freshman and being in an FSEM, I felt really, really connected with this one professor because she really brought me into the UMW community with an interesting topic. My FSEM was called Part Play, Part Game. And I ended up liking the professor so much, I studied abroad in Sweden with her this summer, and we're developing a board game. It's absolutely incredible, like that sort of connection. So I wanted to take my experience as being connected within my FSEM and bring it to other students. And life happens, so I ended up being the peer mentor for Anand Rao and Tim O'Donnell, and I am very blessed to have worked with them. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this FSEM and to have seen the journeys of these students who have all given amazing talks tonight. Am I right? Am I right? Yeah. And I just want to thank you all for coming out and seeing these presentations and being a part of our journey. Thank you.